the various plan element topics in the fall of 2018, and then 3 open houses over the course of 2019. In addition to these public engagement opportunities, we've had 4 council study sessions, as I mentioned, and Let's Talk has been our public engagement platform, which has been available the whole time. In the October 15th meeting, we showed the first complete version of the arts, culture, and placemaking element to the plan. That included a vision and 4 core tenets that had been developed by the Arts Council over the course of 6 months. Council showed its support for including this in the plan. We also took a tour of the park. We showed all the plan projects that are included in the current draft plan from west to east, walking through the park. And we looked at prioritization and cost estimating. We explained what the prioritization criteria were, that they were drawn from our CIP criteria, and that the cost estimating was a very rough planning estimate based on a number of assumptions that could be examined. In your agenda packet as Exhibit 1 is a matrix of questions that we received from council both during the study session last time and subsequently via email. And we've provided answers to the best of our ability to those questions and comments. We're going to go into just a few of them now in this presentation. One of the questions was ADA access. When will it be required? This plan covers ADA access because the park was created before ADA was a statute. And now ADA is a requirement for certain projects. If it's a maintenance project or if it's just minor repairs on an existing facility, there's no ADA requirement. If the facility is being changed to some degree, being renovated, it's likely, but not certain, that ADA access within the facility will be required. Upgrades, such as bathroom stalls or, ramps within the facility, like a playground. But if the facility is actually being substantially changed, being repurposed, or it's a brand new facility, then ADA access will be more fully completed. It'll probably include some kind of access from the identified parking and drop-off areas for that facility. This plan is not a comprehensive analysis of ADA needs in the park. That is coming. We're planning to launch an ADA transition planning process in 2020 that will look citywide at our needs for that kind of facility. Trail width was a question that came up. There's been some discrepancies in our products about what the trail widths actually are, so I went out with other staff in the summer of 2019 and measured the trail every 100 feet. I can tell you from firsthand experience that the trail is 12 feet wide through the Lid Park. The trail is 11 feet wide from Island Crest Way to Shorewood Drive, and it's less than 10 feet wide on average east of Shorewood Drive. That helps us with the planning because there was a lot of discussion during the planning process, about whether we were widening the trail or not, and this helps us answer that question. Another part of the trail planning that we had a lot of discussions about in the planning process was what is the shoulder treatment of these trails. The current plan calls for a clear zone throughout the trail system, but in the Lid Park, the clear zone is left more flexible. And that's because there's been a lot of public comment about having the trail edges more natural, that blend better with the park landscape. We wanted to have the opportunity to be able to grow grass or ground covers or have some kind of organic surface on that 2-foot clear zone. The 2-foot clear zone in any case would be clear of vegetation that overhangs it and would be a firm surface that would allow people to walk on it. In the eastern corridor, the plan is calling for the clear zone to be a gravel surface, and that's because there is no alternate pedestrian route in the eastern corridor. This trail functions effectively as the sidewalk for North Mercer Way and Southeast 35th and other parallel streets. And so people going from Shorewood to Town Center or vice versa need to be able to walk on this trail, and the gravel shoulder provides refuge for pedestrians who might see a bicyclist coming or may want to get out of the way of a pack of bicyclists or something like that. The prioritization criteria are laid out in the draft plan. As I said, they came from the CIP criteria that we use. In the study session last time, it was asked that we include safety as the criteria for the highest priority projects. And so this underlined language that's shown here on the screen provides highest priority to urgent safety issues. We were also asked by email, what would the way forward be once the plan's adopted in terms of public engagement on these projects? We have proposed 3 different levels of public engagement based on the amount of change that projects would cause in the park. Projects that cause minimal change, that are essentially maintaining existing function and character, we would be able to implement those at a staff level at the direction of the parks director. The projects that make minor changes to the park, have minor changes to function, would be something that could be done with minimal input, or 1 round of public input early in design phase, and then directed at the city manager level. And then more significant projects, such as the dog off leash area, the restroom conflict zone, or any other major trail reconfiguration, would have a full public process with multiple contact with the public, as well as contact with council at critical stages. I want to just illustrate that with the example of the Luther Burbank Park Master Plan, where since 2006 we've implemented $4 million worth of capital projects. All the projects that we've implemented have been consistent with the master plan. All the projects that we've done in the park have been reviewed with the Friends of Luther Burbank Park prior to implementation, big or small. And major projects such as the playground, the off-leash area, and the current boat dock configuration project have all had extensive public process in their design phase. So now I'm going to quickly run through the recommended revisions to the draft plan that are in your agenda, Bill. This should go very quickly, and we're not going to stop for questions right in the next few minutes, but we can come back to any of these slides if you'd like to discuss these topics more. So a recommended revision to the draft plan right now is that the draft plan includes 3 palettes for planting: northwest field, a palette, an ornamental palette, and a sensory palette. We're recommending that the northwest field palette be the primary plant palette for the park, that be the palette that's default, but that the other palettes could be used for specific projects and for specific purposes. And those projects would typically be projects that had some level of public input, so that we would have the ability to vet a different kind of landscape with the public. Another recommendation is the water conservation aspect of the plan. The plan offers 3 options. One is no change to the current irrigation practice, and then 2 are practices that cut back irrigation. Instead of trying to pick any one of these things, all of these things may be valid in some situations. We're not very clear yet on what those situations might be. We propose in a revision to this plan that we actually trial the 2 water conservation options on a limited basis, get public feedback, and then propose an expansion of that based on how much water we think we can save and what the effect on park use is. On the trail width, we're recommending only a slight, and it's really a technical change, but the cross-section for the Lid Park right now reads as current width is the cross-section width. And as we showed you just previously, that the current width of the trail through the Lid Park is 12 feet. To be more concrete in the plan, we would like to just show the trail width through the Lid Park as 12 feet, which is the current width. We're showing the width in the eastern corridor as 12 feet, which is the new width that King County will be building the trail to in the sections that they're replacing. So that way we'd have a 12-foot trail showing through the entire park in the two representative cross sections. Now these are representative cross sections. We can't build the trail to this width at every single point on the trail. There's limitations in certain areas, but these are the schematic trail widths that we would strive for in the park. In the plan, there are two options for the restroom conflict zone. One is a trail that includes a pedestrian plaza around the restroom to provide a wider slow zone. The other option is to put a bicycle bypass route behind the restroom. We don't know enough about the cost and the impact of these two options to really pick one right now. So we're proposing that we do some early design on both of these options, find out what the real costs are, especially the cost of relocating the maintenance facility that's integrated into the restroom, and then come back to council with a recommendation, and then we'll have a better budget number for you as well. So the two options would stay in the plan as we're recommending it. And we're recommending also that there's two optional informal soft surface trails shown in the plan that connect ADA access trails together. Together, the ADA access trails that are shown as B and C, and the optional soft surface trails would create a continuous pedestrian parallel route through the upper Lid Park, coming up from Lid B to the tennis courts and then back down to the ball fields. This would provide something that we heard a lot in the planning process, which was to provide separation of pedestrians and bicyclists, and this option would do that. We're not sure, how those trails would be laid out. There's still a lot of design to do, but leaving them in here gives us that option. We're also recommending that we change the current draft plan to show another restroom option at the Lid C parking lot. We showed the restroom at Lid B by the playground because that's where the sewer line is, and we had looked at the Lid C opportunity, but there's almost no there's no drop across the Lid C field, and getting the pipe to be at the correct angle would be very difficult, if not impossible. So it's likely that this location at Lid C will need to have a pump, but it might be feasible. We don't know. We don't know what the cost involved is. Is it doubling the cost, or is it only 20% more? We don't know that. We need to do some early design, find out what the costs are. Staff recognize that the better location is Lid C field. That's where all the sports activity is. We would like to see it there too, but we just need to be cognizant of cost because we're already in, just for the restroom itself, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And finally, we're recommending that the off-leash area not have any particular set of design parameters at this point, that it be included in the plan, and that we'll have an extensive public process in early design to figure out what that dog off-leash area would be. Would it be fenced or not? What would it have? There's just been a lot of discussion on both sides of having it and not having it. We're just not clear where the consensus is, and we need to do more design to find out if there is a point of consensus to design this thing. So at this point, I'm going to stop, and we're open to having any of the questions that have been previously raised discussed. We're open to discussing any of the recommendations that we made, and if there's anything new that needs to be brought up, this is a great time to do that.
Mayor, might it make sense to go back through each of the recommendations?
I was just say, is there a single slide that shows where you need recommendations? Do you have a single summary slide?
I don't.
Okay, so it would be good if you could just, and I'll just write them down briefly.
Yep.
So you need recommendations starting with
This one.
plant
Planting
palette?
character. So the recommendation is Northwest Feel is the default plant palette, but we have ornamental and sensory palettes for specific purposes and projects.
Okay, let's just get the whole list out first. So we
Okay.
have plant palette,
Plant palette, water conservation,
okay, water conservation,
trail width,
trail width,
restroom conflict zone,
restroom conflict zone,
soft surface trail,
soft surface trail,
new restroom,
new restroom,
and off-leash area.
and off-leash areas. So there's 7 of them.
Yes.
Okay. So, council, why don't we just start with any general questions? And then I think what we'll do, unless anybody argues, we'll just go through them sequentially. Are there any broad general questions we have here? Wendy?
So I'm just curious what kind of public input you had from the last time you were here to this one. Was there any of these topics that were particularly more important to our public or not?
We've had mostly email input, and I think the trail width is kind of continues to be one of the topics that people are very interested in. The vegetation, haven't heard a peep on really, in terms of palette, or we maybe heard one comment on the water conservation. The dog area seems like it's got some opinions being expressed. That's the main ones I can think of.
So, Wendy, you were looking for where there was input, but were you also wanting to be able to characterize what direction, if anything?
More just magnitude and kind of in general, because I know we've talked about this for a year and a half, and there was some confusion last time as to whether this was a laundry list of projects we were going to get done, rather than guidelines to sort of take us through the next 20 years. And I just want to be clear that this is a set of guidelines, and the funding is coming over time as we get grants and as it comes through our TIP and CIP, and as partners come in and do upgrades to sewer lines and that kind of thing that they'll replace to this standard. So I just want to be crystal clear, this is a guidebook and a playbook for the future, not a list of projects we're going to go out and do immediately. And that after this year and a half, we've talked about a lot of these topics in depth and broadly for a really long time and had extensive public input.
Yes, I think that's a
Okay,
good
great.
characterization.
Benson?
Well, first of all, I just want to thank you guys for Exhibit 1 as far as the Qs and As and responses, and so I appreciate that. I guess as far as what I liked, one of the responses was, and you talked about this, Paul, the decision-making process and how the public will be engaged depending on if it's a maintenance, if it's minor, if it's a major project. And I guess the only thing I would say, number one, I think that decision-making process should be part of the final plan so that people understand how they can be involved. And I guess the only question I have is, in terms of what's minor, what's major, because obviously that triggers greater participation by the public. So I don't know if you guys have that if you distinguish between minor and major, if it's a dollar amount or how do you define that? And you don't have to answer the question now, but that is probably going to be something that somebody raises, okay? So
Yeah.
that's something to think about.
Yeah, thank you.
Council, any other questions? All right, I've got kind of a technical one. When we were talking about the 2-foot buffer on each side, and the shoulders and the lid park specifically, you said that they need to be firm, but the question in my mind is whether or not they're level. Because in some places, they're firm, meaning some of them are rocks this big.
Mm-hmm.
But if you had a Peloton or a large group of anything coming toward you, or you needed to just get to the side, frankly, that's not, it's firm, but it's certainly not level, and it wouldn't serve as an escape route for pedestrian or arguably dogs or anything else. So can you articulate, when you say firm, do you mean firm and level, or are you just saying rocks this big are going to constitute a 2-foot, you know?
No, I don't think rocks that big constitute the clear zone.
So what's the intent of the clear zone? Is a clear zone intended for a pedestrian to be able to move into it comfortably, or somebody with a stroller, or something like that?
It should be traversable. And WashDOT's trails cross-section has a limit on the amount of slope that can be on, cross slope that can be on that shoulder. So it's intended to have some kind of transition from the trail to the shoulder and back. It can't be a steep slope. So, yeah, and I know what you're talking about. There are kind of cobbles and, kind of rough patches in the trail at various points, which probably need to be addressed because they currently don't serve that kind of traversable function.
Paul, may I interrupt?
Sure.
I underlined this in the agenda bill. I think it provides a good definition for these clear zones. A transitional edge on the sides of the trail that is walkable, does not impact necessary sightlines, and is free of overhanging vegetation.
Yes.
Is that a definition that we could get behind? Because it seems like one of the things we're struggling with is a consistent way to describe the clear zones. So I drew that out of the agenda bill, and if that's accurate and if that meets council's needs, then I'd like to say
Sure.
let's
Well, for me,
define them.
what I like about that is it says walkable, meaning
Right.
it's intended to be a place where people wouldn't necessarily first choose to walk, but if
Right.
they needed to, then it would serve that purpose. Do you have a question on this topic, or?
I have a point of order, which is I thought we were doing general questions first and then going to the specific topics. And I feel like we've gone to a specific topic now, and I wanted to make sure that I wasn't somehow missing the right order of events and not putting questions in where they belong. But this-
My question was generally about trail widths and getting clarification because there was differences. It wasn't intended to go specifically into that topic.
Okay, so we are still on general questions?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
So I guess the question then to council is, are you comfortable with the definition that Jesse has provided, and that would be used? Or to Bruce's point, we could come back and discuss it when we go specifically into the conversation, which is point 5, soft, well, it could be trail width or,
That'd be number 3,
okay, trail width.
trail widths.
I'd suggest we make it part of the trail width conversation. I think it feels like it fits there.
Okay. All right. Any other than general questions?
Not a question, but I'm going to echo, I'm just going to amplify what I think I heard you say and that Wendy then pointed out, which is that with regards to Luther Burbank, you have a master plan, and over the last few years you've spent, we as a city have spent, I think I heard $4 million on improvements there. But that's only a fraction of a envisioned master planned concept that I have no idea what the total is, but far more than that.
Right.
And in a similar fashion, what we're talking about here is decades worth of potential improvements, not something that would come in the first year or 5 years or 10 years.
Right.
And for those citizens who are concerned that this represents a extravagant expenditure at a time we don't have the money, it really is, that's a misnomer, I think, from what's being put together here.
Great, thanks. Ben, sorry, Celine.
Can you tell me, in the history of the Luther Burbank master plan, how many times has an item been added to it or subtracted to it?
Never to my knowledge.
So it was, somebody sat down, visioned it, and that's been the vision from the very beginning?
Well, since 2006. So since 2006, I don't know of any amendment to the master plan.
Is there any need to amend it?
So Jason Kinner, Public Works Director. So I will say that from time to time, excuse me, there have been projects that have been brought up by the community that maybe have not been consistent with the Luther Burbank Master Plan. They haven't been omitted from discussion. There's been plenty of discussion that's taken place over the course of time, and ultimately a decision's been made not to move forward with the project. One idea that comes to mind is a water park or the BMX, the different iteration of the BMX track. Yeah, the parkour. So there have been things that have been brought up from time to time that haven't been included in the Luther Burbank Master Plan that have had good discussion. But ultimately, they haven't come to fruition, but it hasn't prevented any discussion and opportunities for that.
In that list, would you have included the conversation about hosting a preschool there? Okay.
Yes.
All right, general questions. It's not to say that we couldn't come back to them, but then let's go ahead and start through the list. And unless anybody objects, we'll go through in the order presented. The first one being the plant palette. I can say that this was the way I dotted at that open house, so I know I'm comfortable with it. Bruce?
I'm just curious, I see first picture on the left side, or the middle picture, sorry, on the left side shows ivy on a wall. I assume English ivy doesn't count as Northwest planting,
No.
something else or a different species of ivy that we're envisioning there where we do use ivy.
Yes, absolutely. That's Boston ivy on that wall, I believe. But yes, no, we want to get rid of ivy in the park.
Yeah, okay. That's the only question I had. I'm supportive of the approach that that's been proposed.
Benson?
Yeah, I'm supportive of the recommendation as well from the staff, but can you, for us less green-thumbed people, can you sort of explain the ornamental and the sensory, the difference? I get the natural Northwest feel, but.
I'm going to actually ask our landscape architect to do that because she is more versed in that discussion.
We knew that seat would be filled.
So I also brought my stuff just in case I don't leave. So the difference between ornamental and sensory, it's easier actually to explain the sensory. Sensory would basically is a specific style of landscape architecture that really tries to invigorate, to spunt, to create a character that engages different senses. So you might have something that, the example is like ornamental grasses that move a lot in the wind. You hear that movement, you see that movement, it sort of engages you in a different way than, say, a laurel hedge might, or, a large Pacific wax myrtle might. Sensory would be smell. So very fragrant flowers, pollinator type species, things that attract wildlife. So you see that movement, you have an educational element to it. It's really, think of it in terms of like children's gardens, native plant gardens, things that are really more geared around a specific type of experience. Ornamental is really a more visual appeal to it. It's not trying to gear you towards a certain smell or a sight or a certain kind of feeling or evoke any particular emotion. It's intended to really just create a focus with a different type of plant palette.
Anybody else, any comment? All right, so is thumbs up going to be sufficient then? So thumbs up with the staff recommendation? Great, 4. All right, I think next we have the water conservation. Oh, is there, I'm not doing well tonight, am I? My counting is off too. So water conservation. The staff's been through this description. Does anybody have any comment? I know we did talk about it up here a month or 2 ago.
That's right.
Salim?
I missed the last meeting, so I don't know where people landed, but I don't think I'm in favor of browning anything out or changing anything for pastures at this point. To me, it feels a little premature. So that's where my head is. I don't know where everybody else
Benson?
Well, again, you're proposing that these simply be included as options, so we're not making any specific decision. I guess, I think you covered it a little bit in the Qs and As or whatever, but I am also a little concerned about, having too much of the brownout. So what is the decision-making process again for identifying, obviously you guys are thinking in terms of a initial pilot program of some sort, but what is the criteria that's going to be used?
We're hoping to trial it in an area where people can look at it and comment on it and say how they think it impacts them, and then be able to assess that, weigh that against the potential water savings and therefore budget savings that could represent. We know something about what this potential savings is, but we won't know more until we have that kind of feedback. Because, browning something out versus a meadow there are two different levels of water conservation. So it really is just keeping it in the plan keeps it as an option. Right now, we're watering everything to keep it all green, and as you know, that's a third of our maintenance budget for the park.
So Paul, the decision, I just want to be clear, the master plan decision would be to whether or not to include all three of these options as future tools. And then I saw in the materials, you're talking about doing trials
Right.
of both option 1 and option 2. That would likely be, council, something that we would work through the Parks Commission. So they would help determine location and assessment, and then that would be a work item in 2020 that they would then report back to you. So implementation on a larger scale wouldn't go beyond a trial period in 2020. But it is certainly your pleasure, if you don't like option 1 or option 2 or both, to take those out and just retain our current irrigation standards as the part of the plan.
Okay, we have Bruce and then Celine.
So the question I was going to ask, Paul, you've answered it, but you answered it so briefly and without enough emphasis, so I'm going to ask you to sort of say it louder. The cost of irrigation is significant for the park. Can you
Right.
remind us how significant it is?
The budget, I believe, is $184,000 a year
And
It's
that
currently-
represents, you said, a third of the annual budget
for the
park.
maintenance of that park. Right.
So,
And I recently worked with Parks Operations to look at where, we just went through and said, what are the low-hanging fruit areas to cut back water in? If we went with, if we went with the highest level of water conservation, which is still watering areas for part of the summer, we don't want to just have everything brown out by 4th of July, but watering, for part of the summer and then cutting it off at the end of the summer. We're now thinking we could be close to $50,000 in savings.
And-
But that's, there's a bunch of assumptions in there, so I don't want to guarantee that. That's just a kind of an order of magnitude
I understand.
estimate.
The thing I would suggest is, I'm supportive of what you're proposing here. What I'll suggest is if you're going to do trial areas and, for instance, put up signage that says this area is being trialed as a
Right.
lower irrigation area, please put up not only that that's happening, but the savings that go along with it, so people aren't just, because, the answer from everyone will be, oh, I prefer green.
Right.
But it's a more complicated, nuanced question. If the question is, how do you feel about brown, and we saved $50,000?
Great, Celine?
So I remember a lot of discussion early on about the soil and the vegetation and the 20 years of existence of this project and things coming to the end of the cycle and some things being not appropriate for the place in which they were planted. Is there not a good portion of watering that's occurring in the flower beds, the plantings, the areas that are not green grass areas that are mowed?
We've done a lot of cutting back of established beds in terms of water use. So, a lot of especially on a lot of the kind of the things you don't look at so much, the slopes that are forested, the backsides of retaining walls and things like that, those are mostly not irrigated anymore. You know, we're trying to keep it green, and some, you know, the shrub beds, for the most part, stay green with minimal water at this point. Most of what we're irrigating is lawn and kind of like high visibility shrub beds, or, you know, like the overpasses, where, you know, if that's basically 18 inches of soil, you can't totally cut them off and without killing them.
Okay, so you think the bulk of the 184,000 a year is mostly on lawns and grass?
I do.
So my concern about putting it in is that things that get put in will get staff energy, and some will get done, and some will sit in a plan. I understand that. But my understanding was we were gonna try and do a comprehensive planting analysis, soil analysis, kind of version 2.0 of this park landscape throughout the whole linear park. I just hate to put this in there at this stage, because this feels like what you do when you fail. And I want the staff, the plan, the allied agencies that would work with us to have all of the tailwinds they need to try and be successful at having a park that retains its character, but does it with using less water. And that means changing the plantings, changing the soil, looking at the drainage, all the things that you guys have mentioned. To me, I feel like you could put this in another appendix that says, maybe it add to the plan 10 years from now or 5 years from now. But to me, it feels like it's just cart ahead of the horse. So I don't support it. I do think that people would like to retain the character of the park as it stands. And I do think that we need to try and have some alternate strategies first.
Okay. Wendy?
And I agree, it'd be nice to sustain the character of our parks throughout the whole park, but with the budget constraints we're under and the priorities that we have and the limited resources and attention we have, I like keeping this tool in the toolbox. I think we should be very careful about how early and how often and how large an area we deploy with this, and I would defer to the Parks Advisory Board to help us and you figure out where in this community along this whole park makes the most sense to start that and get the most feedback possible. Because I think being clear, like Bruce said, about why we're doing this, to save money, to balance our priorities, if it's brownouts versus, you know, replanting or making a trail safer, I think we need to make that clear. So I'm in favor of keeping this option because it is another tool in our toolbox as we have this plan for 20 years.
Yeah, I'm going to take a shot at it. I, too, would like to see this stay in there. And I'm going to be honest, to me, option 2 doesn't seem like, you know, a lesser option. When I look at that and what I took away from staff and some of the feedback is it's less water. It's a different look and feel, certainly less manicured than what we've had. But I'll be frank, I think there's a certain aesthetic to it myself. We talked about sensory. To me, that is sort of a sensory feel. But at the end of the day, sort of the rational decision in my mind, I think is very similar to Wendy's, which is let's go ahead and let's keep those tools in there. And I think that it will be great to have some pilots. I don't necessarily think that they have to happen in 2020. I'm not sure that there's a rush to pilot these. If there's other burning topics, let's put the resource there. But with the Parks Committee, I think we've got some great feedback. And like I said, I guess at this point, I'd be happy to leave future councils and the park team with more options rather than few. So, Councilor, are there any final comments? Sorry, Jesse, you look.
I apologize for interrupting, Mayor. I think what the Deputy Mayor said, it's in the plan. It may just not be all packaged together the way you just described it, because the plan, our work, we did look at the soils, and one of the goals is to amend the soils so that we need less water because we're watering sand right now in many areas. And we also looked at a new plant palette that is hardier in conditions that we're experiencing. So perhaps what we can do to bring all this together is a stronger policy statement around, you know, how all of those things work together, soils, plants, and keeping these tools in the toolbox as well. That may be what's missing. Does that make sense?
Does that help at all? You can wait and see.
Well, I mean, it does and it doesn't, because from a policy perspective, if you're going to go out and try and cut 184,000 by browning something out or turning something into a field, then I'm not supportive of that. And
You're
it sounds
not,
like
yeah. You're not making a commitment to cut all of our irrigation. It was simply to find opportunities to reduce, which, as this plan is implemented, particularly as we work on maintenance restoration and amending soils, it will, those areas that we're having to water excessively to keep things alive, we'll be able to turn back the water. Just a suggestion on a way to bring this together, because I think the
I
pieces are there.
understand, Yeah, I think when I look at 184 grand in context of if you were extremely successful, what percentage you would save? Maybe it's 25, maybe it's 30%. And then looking at those pictures, thinking option 2 is gonna be, where we have option 3 will now look like option 2. I just don't believe it for a second. It's gonna be brown, because it's gonna be during the drought. It will be tall grass, but it's gonna reduce the usable area for people to run and play ball with their kids, or maybe do something with their dog, or put down a blanket. And so the net effect to me is really not worth the benefit. I can save that money elsewhere. I'd be happy to save that money elsewhere. But I prefer option 3 over any of these options. Even though it's a very nice picture, I don't believe it's gonna look like that.
And we're not talking about universally replacing. My understanding was that there were just certain portions of Aubrey Davis where you would, A, brown out, or B, put in these meadows. This wasn't every place that currently has this sort of manicured look.
Correct. And
Treated
just a
out.
quick clarification too. So of that 184,000 that we're talking about, it's a big dollar amount, excuse me. It's not all going to go away if we go with option 1 or option 2, because you do have athletic fields and you have some other uses in this park that will still need to be maintained at the current levels. And so what's in front of you, as Jesse pointed, is yes, it's a combination of soil amendments, new planting, and then also looking at options where to possibly use option 1 or option 2 with the brownout or a different approach to lower maintenance meadows. That's the path forward that's proposed.
Yeah, and then we'll move on to Benson.
So just real quickly, we get paid by WASDOT each year to maintain this linear park. How much do they pay us each year to do that? And does that include, do we use some of that payment for irrigation?
Yeah, they pay us for the majority of the budget for the park. They pay us $535, I think, something like that. It's a little over
They
500.
pay us over $500,000, and out of the $500,000, we spent $184,000 on irrigation. And all I'm trying to do is create the least amount of work for staff, create the most amount of opportunity for citizens to enjoy the park as it exists, and to have the most surface area in that park that is usable. That's all.
Great. Benson?
I guess my only question here is, again, I'm in favor of having as many tools in the toolbox, okay? So the question is, I mean, as the deputy mayor has raised concerns, and I think a lot of us would share that we don't want to see the whole park browned out, but who, frankly, is going to be making that recommendation, that decision? Is it going to be the Parks Committee that then makes a recommendation to the department, or is it
You
come
mean
to
for the
coun-
pilot, or?
Well, just for a lot of these decisions.
Right. It's a level of service standard that actually I would anticipate would be coming back to you as part of your PROS plan work in 2020. We don't currently have a level of service standard for this park, so that would be appropriate. I would also argue in budget discussions, if the council directs, for a reduction to be made, we might say, let's look at 10% water use reduction in Aubrey Davis. And this allows us some opportunities just to explore a different approach to that.
Thank you. I mean, the point is that we'll have different, we'll have touches on this whole issue, and the public will have touches as well, I assume.
Yes, your level of service standards are generally policy decisions.
Yeah.
Council, any more discussion? We want to do a thumbs up, thumbs down?
I have a quick question.
Sure.
If we wanted to brown out a field in Luther Burbank and it was not in the master plan, could we do that? If the council, we have a hot summer, we have a budget crisis, can we do that?
Yes, you could. I will
Thank-
say that Luther Burbank doesn't have irrigation throughout the entire park. That's very limited.
Okay, so thumbs up supports the recommendation from staff, which is including all strategies in the ADMP. So all in favor of the staff recommendation, thumbs up. All right, I'm going to do my math. It's 5 thumb. Are you thumbing up? Okay, thumbing up. And those opposed? 1 thumb down. Okay, adds up to 6. Just so you know, I was having math problems earlier. Yep. Okay, so then we're moving on to the next one, which is trail width. So, okay, so. Okay, so questions, just reminding that, I'm just going to read for the audience. Staff recommends maintaining the current trail cross-sections as presented in the preliminary draft ADMP, as discussed, I guess I would say.
So really what I wanted to do is raise the issue of the way we've been talking about these, what do you call them, transversable shoulders? And you've been talking about these being like safe harbors for pedestrians from bicycle pelotons or places for strollers. Can you just briefly describe the right-of-way and who has the right-of-way when it comes to pedestrians, strollers, and bicycles? Is it incumbent on the citizen to get off the sidewalk for the bicyclist, or is it the other way around?
I understand the faster moving traffic yields to the slower moving traffic.
Okay, so it should really never be the case where a person needs to seek refuge in this shoulder, and that it's more likely, like what I'm hearing, is there'll be no overhang of vegetation in this 2-foot clear zone. And to me, that's so that a bicyclist can ride near the edge of a path without risk of the handlebar getting swiped by a tree branch and then falling off. I mean, to me, when I use that trail, I don't see a lot of pedestrians trying to find harbor on the shoulder, but I know that I ride my bike right up against it if I want to create the maximum amount of distance between me and some other trail use, right? So do I have it wrong, or has the way we've been talking about this evening been a little bit out of touch with reality?
I believe the way I believe they work the way you're saying, but I also think that pedestrians are more likely to walk closer, like right along the shoulder edge, because then the rule of the road is you stay right if you're moving slower and you stay left if you're moving faster. Bicycles use more of the center of the trail corridor, and pedestrians tend to drift to the edge where they're, moving slower and can be passed on the left. So the clear shoulder gives the pedestrians the sense of space to walk on that edge without having, the same thing, the sense of the bushes are encroaching on their travel way or whatever. So it's not, the clear zone's not just for the bicyclists, it gives the pedestrians the sense of space to be able to walk closer to that trail edge. And then that gives the bicyclist room
Council, are there
too.
any other questions? Yeah.
So as I read through this, cost came to mind, because today we don't have sort of managed shoulders, and obviously they're gonna be, some gravel or some sort of surface like that. Is there now a cost to managing those shoulders that we don't have today?
I don't think so. We weed eat the shoulders now to keep down vegetation. I think we're talking about the same treatment going forward. I don't think there's anything different.
Okay.
I mean, if the shoulders are grass, we mow them. If they're gravel, we weed eat them. I think that's pretty much it, the same thing.
And all right, so that brings up another question, sorry to jump into my second question, but if that's the case, do you foresee that a large portion, because if a large portion of the shoulder is already there and we're already maintaining it, do you foresee it being engineered in this next phase, or just sort of naming that finished shoulder a finished shoulder? Does that make sense? Are we doing something to it beyond where it is today, or are we just naming it?
I think there's places where it needs to be reestablished. We have overhanging vegetation that needs to be cut back, which is really a maintenance issue. It's not really a master plan issue. But there are, as Debbie pointed out, the mayor pointed out, there are places where the shoulder has degraded, and that there's now cobbles sticking up in it. It's not a smooth walkable kind of transition zone. It's even questioned whether that's really a capital or a maintenance thing, because it really could be very quickly fixed by just spreading some gravel and covering over those kind of rough spots. But there is some work to do, I think.
I'll also just chime in that we do have some projects that are going to impact this trail. So having a standard in the pros plan, which they have to replace to, is important for those efforts. King County Sewer Project in particular coming through.
And council,
Benson.
oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Councilmember.
I'm sorry, I just had a quick question as far as, obviously we're concerned about safety issues and trying to avoid bicycle and pedestrian conflicts. Is there signage that you guys are going to be proposing as part of the plan that at least alerts users, pedestrians and cyclists? What is the right of way and who's got the rights, and, just to encourage, that you basically avoid conflicts? I mean, is there, I'm just not sure what kind of signs can be out there, but,
Yeah, the plan includes both traffic calming and wayfinding treatments, which includes signage. So there's two different kinds of signs, like the kind of the stay right, pass left, or,
Okay.
Slow zone, or whatever it is. Those could both be signs, on a post, or they can be applications on the pavement. There's other,
I don't recall seeing such signs right now. I mean, I could be wrong, but
there are,
there are.
yeah.
I think there's some out there that say
Yeah.
like
I'm just
yield
going
to
too fast.
pedestrians or
Yes,
something.
right.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, and I, appreciate sort of rule of law being that the faster traffic should yield, but, I'm also thinking about myself, dog on a leash. My intent is to keep that dog over toward the edge as well, simply because I know the closer a dog is to a cyclist, the more apprehensive typically the cyclist is, in some cases understandably. So to me, those sort of safe havens are important, and I would just like to see them articulated. I think Jason makes a good point insofar as the need to make sure that when replaced, that they are replaced to a certain level. So this is where we go back to the definition that the city manager had provided in the beginning, which was basically walkable. And I'd like to make sure that that's maintained consistently throughout the ADMP.
Sure, so I'll just read it again. This was taken from the agenda bill. The clear zone is a transitional edge on the sides of the trail that is walkable, does not impact sightlines, and is free of overhanging vegetation. Council, I also want to just take a moment to remind you about the change. When we looked at the trails, the Lid Park and the eastern part of Aubrey Davis were looked at differently. In the eastern portion of Aubrey Davis, the trail width varies because we have a whole number of impacts, retaining walls and things. In the Lid Park, and we admit, we did this late in the game, when we went and measured the trail, it is essentially 12 feet. So an earlier version of the plan, we were describing the Lid Park as like for like. So if the trail gets replaced, it gets replaced with the same width. We went back as staff and just changed it to 12 feet because that is consistent what is out there right now. That has obviously raised some concerns that there was a switch, but that was not a material change. It was just to make it factually correct. So I wanted to clarify that's what you're seeing on the screen.
Great, thanks. Celine?
So I want to clarify what you just said. On page 43 of the draft master plan, there's a red line, which I think designates the trail that you measured. And there are on the lid other trails along the stacks, along the backside. Some of those surely don't measure 12 feet. So in the context of this request for language that you want to change, are we just talking about the red line that is on page 43?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, Dave?
Yeah, super quick one. When we talk about signage, so the big conflicts are obviously cyclists and pedestrians, and the time of conflicts generally gets you a certain demographic of pedestrians and a certain demographic of cyclists, right, commuter times. Is there any thought about striping the trail? Like down the middle, so you've got sort of a bit of traffic separation. I hate to even throw it out there, but you sort of see the pedestrians and their walking groups sort of spread about, and the cyclists are.
I know we've discussed it. I'm going to defer to Juliet to answer that because it was discussed.
So it was discussed at some of our focus group meetings early on. It was also discussed during the conversations on Let's Talk, and also I think in the second open house, just in general. For the most part, the community members that during those discussions was not in favor of striping. One of the things they really like about this character in the park is that it does feel very natural. It's not like you're in Green Lake. It's not a very urban type of situation like some of the Burt Gilman Trail might be. And so striping and putting a defined line or trying to say peds on one side and bikes on the other was not preferred. It's also not quite as realistic on a 12-foot wide path. You're going to get people using both sides depending on your group. And so allowing, one of the sort of core principles was that there are options for everybody without putting the stripe down the road. People have options. If there's no bikes on a trail, a person in their bike or in their dog and stroller can take up the whole trail. And you're not feeling like you're not obeying the right rules because of a stripe on the ground.
Did NIMS weigh in on that particular issue at all?
They were part of the focus groups, and so they were part of those general discussions. Paul, I'll leave it to you because you can identify people to their organization
Yes.
better than I can.
I don't remember them weighing in on that.
Okay, Council, are there any more questions? People ready to do a thumbs up? All right, so thumbs up for staff recommendation. All right, we have a 6-0. Super, we are 3 out of 7, so let's keep cooking. The next one, the fourth topic is the restroom conflict zone. Staff recommendation is to keep both options in the final draft plan so that they can conduct further analysis, I assume as funding and safety issues encourage. So Council, any questions about this? All right, Council, you ready to do a thumbs up? All in favor of staff recommendation? All right, we're seeing a 5-1, 4.
Mayor, I didn't speak to it enough. I do want to call out, we've certainly received a lot of public feedback on this, and a number of people are concerned about the option to the right, which is the path behind the restroom. So I just feel that of all the options we're considering, this is probably the one we've heard most on. However, you didn't make a decision tonight. It would basically, the commitment would be to look at both options further, and particularly the cost analysis, because that has not been done.
So if and when this were to come forward, there'd be a lot more public discussion, including probably through the Parks
Right.
Commission, come back to council, et cetera. So
And let me
that's-
put an asterisk on this because I want to be transparent. We have a $500,000 appropriation from the state for projects in this park. Our recommendation will likely be to fund safety projects first. This project is probably at the top of the list. So in full disclosure, provided the council supports that direction, this project would probably be back in front of you for consideration in 2020. We would ask the Parks Commission, along with the staff, to do the analysis, but I just want to know that we're deferring a decision maybe just months.
Okay, but it would come to council after it has been through.
We would ask, since you have a Parks and Rec Commission, we would ask them to vet this and do another public discussion.
Okay, Benson.
Just, I think you sort of answered my question. It was really, what triggers this study or this particular project? So you're saying that safety is obviously #1 priority, and that's, will the Parks Committee be asked to prioritize these projects?
That's correct. This zone is probably the #1, outside of the town center, this is probably the #1 conflict or congestion zone in Aubrey Davis Park. It rose to the top throughout the process, and you can understand why. There's a Little League field right next door, and when it's not a Little League field, there's dogs and other activities happening. And the trail can be pretty fast, and so this was an area that we said we've got to figure out a different treatment. There are pretty clear pros and cons to both, but we stopped short of doing the cost estimate and designing it, more than what you see right here, concept. So I just wanted to be honest, this is probably coming back for further consideration pretty quickly.
Celine.
I just want to explain my no vote on this. When we started this process, I urged staff not to uncouple the bicycle infrastructure on North Mercer Way from the Aubrey Davis master plan. And I get that that probably didn't occur, couldn't occur because that's outside the scope of this. My intent was that we would find safe, efficient, better routes for bicycles than this. And what we're doing, I think, is we're kind of, since we've decoupled it, we've moved one problem into this, and we're going to force a solution here in the park when we could solve this, I believe, on North Mercer Way, cheaper, better, smarter than trying to reduce this conflict point in this park this way. That's why I don't support it.
Okay. All right, so I think we're going to move to the fifth issue / question, which is soft surface trail. And I just want to emphasize, this is for discussion purposes, this is for within the lid. Is there any conversation about this existing anywhere else at this point, or envisioned anywhere else in the master plan?
No.
Okay. So the staff recommendation is to retain the optimal informal soft surface trail in the Aubrey Davis master plan. Optional. Between the hearing aid and the glasses, I'm doing really well. These trails provide an alternative walking route for the Mountains to Sound Trail. Council, any questions? Celine,
I'm just gonna-
then Bruce.
Do you want to go first?
No, that was.
Oh,
He's ready to
sorry.
vote. I'm just going to suggest that this is to create an ADA-created path, is that right? So it has to have only a maximum level of incline?
So I think we're hoping it to design it to ADA. I don't think it has to because it's not providing access to any facility. It's just linking two ADA routes together.
But the indeterminate nature of where the path would go is largely because you have a maximum grade that you can go and you have to get from here, A to B, right?
Right.
And so you don't really know exactly where you would go to do that, but because it has to be, or it wants to achieve ADA standards, it's going to be longer
That's right.
than shorter. The reason that I'm not generally supportive of this is because of all of that landscaping that is going to be taken out by it. I would prefer that we not put this in because that is a really good buffer between, the multi-use trail, the tennis courts, the lid that we're trying and create some refuge in. I really think if you do this, you're going to be removing huge swaths of that landscape, which I think would be negatively kind of impacted on that buffer zone.
Can you comment on that? I mean, I can see that you might have to remove something, but I would take away the objective being the buffer. Is that something that wouldn't be possible if you were to implement a trail like this?
I think it's a point well taken. I don't think it wipes out the buffer, but there's less. There's no doubt that would be less. How much we don't know. We haven't designed it. Again, this is conceptual. We could get into 10% design and then decide this is too much of an impact and stop. So with some investment in design, we could find out that this is not what we want. Again, this is one of those projects that has a big impact to the park. We would do it with, extensive review.
Right, and just to be clear, I was supportive of ADA parking stalls on West Mercer Way, along the perimeter edge of the park, and even the cul-de-sac street end. I don't want to be restrictive on how people with mobility needs can get to this park. I just think this is the least efficient way to do it.
So would you support a connection trail if it wasn't ADA, if it just kind of came up the hill just to have a pedestrian alternate route?
I'd have to walk it with you, but I'm pretty sure it's already there. Like between the basketball court and getting up to the street, there are a couple trails already embedded in there. One is informal, and one I
Okay.
think is more formal.
Okay.
I just want to call out to another, this is on the list of items that we've heard feedback from the community that are not supportive for the reasons that Deputy Mayor Neese just described. It will require removal of vegetation. So I want to acknowledge that we've received feedback in that regard.
Okay, Wendy?
So in terms of removing vegetation, don't we have a robust replanting plan or protocol for as we change vegetation and make upgrades? I mean, it's not like we're going to pave over paradise, right?
Right. I mean, we still could have lots of room for vegetation on the slope, but there would be less based on the amount of trail surfacing. You want to say something?
Plant more in some of the green areas and make it more of an interesting trail, do an upgrade altogether?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, there's a trail that's similar to what we're proposing in Luther Burbank Park. It still has, there's still slopes on either side of the trail that need to have vegetation on them. Yeah.
Okay.
One of the areas
Wendy,
of concern.
I'm just going to ask Wendy if you could make sure you turn on your mic. Thanks.
So the switchback is an area of concern. Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's densely vegetated. So to bring a trail through there, we would be, I just, again, in the interest of full transparency, I want to describe what we're showing here.
Yeah.
So that would require pretty significant vegetation removal with the option of replanting or restoring other areas. Again, I just want to be candid.
Okay, Dave?
Yeah, so I came at it from a different angle, which is, it seemed like an enormous expense, particularly given ADA grading and the path that you'd have to take in order to get that, and the removal and beautifying of the vegetation that you're removing. And as I walked through there this past weekend, it struck me that it seems like it's a marginal increase in utility for what would be an extraordinarily large cost, most likely. So it felt to me like we're not improving that user experience dramatically from what it is now, but we're going to a lot of disruption to the park and a fair amount of expense in order to do that. So I came at it a little bit from a different angle than the public sentiment, but probably the same result.
I'm going to take a swing at this one. I appreciate, that there would be a change and that there would potentially be a reduction in the buffer. But one of the things that personally is super important for me is that our parks be accessible to all people, irrespective of their accessibility levels. And what I've seen happen at Luther Burbank when part of the shoreline was restored, what I've seen through various other parks, is you create a whole new user community. It's not the same group that just has now more space, but it just creates a whole different set of opportunities for a community of people who have not necessarily had the opportunity or the benefit. And I do feel that through the course of public input and vetting through dollars and through vegetation, et cetera, that the community will have a good chance to weigh in. But this to me is just about creating opportunity for, a group of people who might not currently be able to enjoy Aubrey Davis Park. And I can't see not supporting it at this point when there's so much good that could come and so much that is still unknown. So it has my full support. Benson?
Yeah, that's a difficult one. I as with Councilmember Wiesentiner, I think that thing that struck me was the cost of this particular project. And it's not required by the ADA at this point. I mean, obviously, I think you talked in terms in your, maybe in the agenda bill or maybe in the questions and answers that if, for instance, the tennis courts were improved, then certainly then there would have to be some sort of ADA compliance, but may not be necessarily what we're showing here. So I have some reservations about this particular project. I guess the question I have for you is simply that this is not set in stone, obviously. Obviously, there's a lot of planning that would have to go ahead, but if somebody wanted to pursue some sort of trail that paralleled the bike path or the road line or what have you, this is not necessarily it. It could change. Is that correct? I mean, this is not the only path forward, so to speak.
This is the only parallel pedestrian path that we're proposing in this master plan. So, and the reason we're proposing it here is because this is one of the biggest conflict areas. This is one of the areas where we need that separation. We have high-speed bicyclists going up and down substantial grades. We have pedestrians wanting to transition through different functional areas of the park. So then there are other routes. There's paths more to the north, on the north side of the park here, but they don't meet ADA either right now. They have steep grades on them. So it really, you don't have a lot of choices. I don't want to say that there are other really good choices.
Wendy, and then Dave.
So what happens if we take this out of this plan? Then there's no path forward for any sort of pedestrian trail in that part of the park?
Well, the ADA, the B and C ADA access trails would still be in the plan, and there would be some pedestrian access. That would be significant access to facilities, but a continuous walking experience would not be accessible.
So just to be clear, B and C would be in the plan, just not the dotted line?
Not the dotted lines, right?
So you wouldn't be able to traverse the entire park?
Right.
Okay. Dave?
You know, the only other thing that struck me is, just from a, you know, one of the cool things about our parks is they're, and through your excellent engineering, they're a little bit wild. They have a little bit of a wild feel to them, and even though they're urban and they're not really wild, they have that feel to them. And I think, you know, once you've gravelled it or paved it, you've gravelled it or paved it, and we remove that sort of wild feel, and you don't ever go back. And so to me, the preservation of that, of something that you all have created, sort of a motif that you've created in all the parks, begins to degrade as we add more, you know, formal infrastructure to it. If we're hunting for votes, that was just a little nail in the coffin.
Okay, council, are we ready to do a thumbs up, thumbs down? Okay, all in favor of the staff recommendation, thumbs up. Those opposed, thumbs down. So I am counting 4-2 opposed. So staff, question, we're not going with your recommendation. I think the question is what then is in there?
You see B and C, those ADA trails stay. The two rectangles saying optional informal soft surface trail would go.
Okay, all right. Good, so team, we're down to 2 more. The next one is new restroom.
Maybe
So the-
to expedite the conversation, this is really just saying the restroom is in the plan and we don't know which location it will be in because we have to do further engineering work on sewer and water utilities. So that's.
So please
essentially-
leave both options in there.
Please keep both, the restroom was generally well supported throughout the process. It's the location that's being debated now, and we don't have enough information.
Okay. Council, any particular, okay, thumbs up? Celine, all right, we've got a 6-0 on that one. Thank you for that speedy one. And then the final point being the off-leash dog park, or dog area. So as proposed, the recommendation is to retain this project in the final draft, which is some form of potential off-leash area around the stacks on the lid. Questions coming from? All right, so council, all in favor? Okay, you have a question, yeah, then go.
So I just wanted to ask, the priorities that council changed at the last meeting in terms of adding safety, which would be a trigger to move something up the priority order. If this area were if this is included in the plan, but it is prioritized down the list, and then we have an instance of a dog on dog injury, dog on human injury, dog on child injury, would that not trigger that safety priority and move this up the list in terms of projects that need to be done?
I think that's part of a bigger question because could we in any way say that having had an off-leash area would have prevented that injury? You know, I mean, it's hard to conjecture what the impact of an off-leash area might have because dogs are allowed to run off-leash in other parts of the park as well. So
even if you created a off-leash dog fenced area, you would still have the rest of the park be voice control.
yeah, I mean, that's the current code. We're not proposing to change the code. This is for people who aren't comfortable running their dog off-leash because they don't have very good control of their dog and need a fence to keep their dog contained. We heard that in the public comment that was a desire. I mean, the whole lid is well used by dog owners. I mean, all the fields are used. Like you were saying, even some of the informal grass areas are used. Dogs are run in many sections of the park. This would just create another choice for dog owners who can't run their dog just totally off leash.
Sure.
Council, any more questions? All in favor of retaining this project in the final draft plan, thumbs up. 1, 2, 3, 4. Those opposed? 2, thumbs down, so 4-2, it stays in. So I think we have gotten through your list. Is that correct? So just to reiterate, my understanding is you will take this feedback, you'll update the plan, and then it comes before council for adoption or anticipated adoption December 3rd. that correct? That's what I'm seeing in the planning schedule.
November 19th.
We had a placeholder on November 19th for additional
Placeholder.
discussion. If the additional discussion isn't needed on November 19th, we would come back and present you with a resolution for adoption. Is that correct?
So maybe my planning
Correct.
schedule is,
So-
oh, I see, you have a study session potential. Okay.
So-
So based on your thinking right now, do you think we need another study session on this, or?
I think we're coming back the 19th.
I was
No,
gonna say,
I think-
please say no.
No, I think we're coming back to the 19th for adoption. So we'll make revisions to this and we'll bring it back on the 19th.
So rather than the 3rd, we would go ahead and try to pass it on the 19th.
Correct.
Okay, great, super. So with that, council, I'm going to suggest we reconvene at 7:10.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So council, we're going to resume at 7:10, which is a minute from now.
You also only have one recycling bin now.
No, I have two.
You do? Oh, you upgraded.
I'm gonna sell mine. I'm gonna Craigslist extra bins.
Hey, recycle it?
Oh, yeah. Recycle bins. Recycle bins. In my recycle bin.
Oh, my God.
Problem solved. Don't shake your head.
Those are plugged in for the last 3 days now, it says 20.
Name's still here.
Okay. So we just took a brief recess after the study session, which was discussing the Aubrey Davis master plan, which will be coming back before council, the next council meeting. And we now move on to the city manager report. And for that, we welcome interim city manager Jesse Bond.
Let's try that again. Good evening, and thank you again. I am Jessie Bond, your interim city manager. Hey, how's that for a beautiful fall picture on the screen? Yeah. All right, we're headed into winter now, so enjoy it for a few more weeks. This is mostly a good news report tonight. I thought I'd keep it light. So congratulations to 17 community members that recently finished their CERT training, and they are now prepared to help us and help you in the event of an emergency. Also have to give a shout out to our police folks for facilitating this effort. Thank you, Chief, I see you over there. And Jennifer Franklin as well, who is not here tonight. Also, a good news story, and this isn't a city event, but it's a partnership event. A number of years ago, a couple local community members started a pumpkin walk in Pioneer Park. If you attended those early years, the event quickly outgrew Pioneer Park. And a little over a year ago, when the new parks director was hired, that would be me, I told them it wasn't going to work anymore in Pioneer Park, and we had all these rules and safety concerns. And due to the timing, we had to take a year off. So, bad parks director. That's why we got rid of me. Anyway, this is a testament to resiliency and a lot of creative problem solving. So Amanda Colburn and Laura Aberto, as well as a number of other volunteers, said, we still want to make this happen. What can we do? We moved it to Luther Burbank Park. Youth and Family Services Foundation got involved as well, and it was back. And I know when I took my kids through the event, I guess it was 2 weekends ago, there were 1,000 people that had already come through, and we were barely 45 minutes in. So I know we had over 2,000 people there. Anyway, great community spirit. 215 carved pumpkins out there. I think we're going to be looking for a few more next year, but overall, a great event. And thank you to the community members that helped bring it back and make it happen. Recology, I think I anticipated. So I wanted to mention Recology has really made an incredible almost final push. They brought on 20 additional staff to go out and do a sweep of Mercer Island to pick up the bins that were left behind by Republic. They retrieved another 8,000. I was out with my dog this morning in our neighborhood, and I still saw Republic carts, but it was interesting. They were all being used, so they weren't just abandoned. Anyway, in just a moment, I'll have information on how to contact Recology, Councilmember Wiesentiner. If you still have a cart that needs to be retrieved, they would be happy to assist. Billing, just a reminder, you will see your first bill in November, and you should be seeing credits if you had cans that were, if you received extra cans that were then eventually picked up. But ultimately, we know there will be some changes that need to be made. So please reach out to Recology. If you'd like to speak to them in person, they will be at the Harvest Farmers Market on November 24th. And this is just a few odds and ends things about Recology. Now that Halloween has passed, we're thinking about Christmas. Thanksgiving is the abandoned holiday in the middle there. Some news, I think we know this, Recology will pick up your Christmas tree as long as it's not decorated and not flocked. And that will be the first 2 weeks in January. So we'll be promoting that as we get closer to the holidays. Also, good news, Mercer Island customers are using the Recology store to drop off those odd and unusual recycling items. And we're going to start promoting those opportunities more in our newsletter and otherwise. And Councilmember Wiesentire, there's the number for you, your hotline to call for your cart. Okay.
Can I ask just one clarifying question? For people who are still, can they still drop off their Christmas trees here at City Hall?
No.
So it's okay. So it's curbside or not?
That was well timed. Jason Kittner, Public Works Director.
Because I want to make sure that nobody's confused and you find yourself with a whole bunch of Christmas trees.
Excellent clarification. So starting this year, we will not be collecting them here at the shop any longer. This is a new service provider, Recology, and we're going to take full advantage of it. This is good. This will be the first year that goes out, so we will get out additional information on it. We have postcards going out at the tree lot and coordinating with YFS, but yes, we will not be collecting them here at the shop this year.
Great question. Final slide, and I did tell you I was keeping it light this evening. We have an anniversary sale at our thrift shop. Did you know that? All right. Well, it's happening again because it's the anniversary sale. November 11th, this Monday, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Save 30% throughout the store. I understand it's when we bring out all of our special treasures. And this is a really big day for us in terms of funding for youth and family services. So I'll put a plug in for that. And that is all I have for you this evening. Thank you. That is a nice
Great,
photo.
thank you. I will say, if you're still searching for that perfect fur coat, I saw one at the thrift store last year at the anniversary sale. Yep. Okay, so super, thank you. The next item on our agenda is appearances, and this is the opportunity for anyone to speak to council on any item. All remarks will please be addressed to the council as a whole and not to individual council members or staff members. Please be nice and not boisterous, threatening, or personally abusive. And just a quick reminder that council cannot accept comments on any campaign-related matters. That includes individual offices or ballot propositions, as we are not discussing any on our agenda this evening. So when it's your turn to address council, please be sure to speak audibly into the podium microphone, state your name for the record, and please do limit your comments to 3 minutes. So, do we have anyone signed up? Anyone who wants to speak? Public appearances? Going once? Going twice? Okay, no public appearances. I think I heard a cheer from down the row. Next item of business is the consent calendar, and it contains this evening accounts payable reports for October 10th, October 17th, October 24th, certification of payroll dated October 25th, minutes for September 17, October 7, October 15, October 25, and AB 5625, due diligence costs for the city's proposed commuter parking and mixed-use projects. May I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. We now move on to regular business. And the first item of business is Agenda Bill 5615, that I'm going to spell it out, SAMHSA, Grants for Youth and Family Services Prevention Work. This is continuing the theme of good news. So with that, I welcome Cindy Goodwin, Youth and Family Services Director.
Good. Thank you, Mayor Bertland, members of the council. Yes, this is great news. This is really exciting, and I have 2 great grants to talk about that we're asking you to approve that the city manager sign, that we accept them. This is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. I'm going to talk about the grants, kind of the history of what we do and how we came to apply for these grants. And then I'm going to have Derek Franklin, our Senior Programs Manager and Clinical Supervisor, talk with you about the contents of the grant, the strategy, a little bit about the prevention model that we use, and talk about data and outcomes. The grant funding at Youth and Family Services, this is part of our effort to look for funding for services that we have currently, our core funding, our core services, as well as our prevention services, and we keep an eye out for anything that might go within needs that we know are part of our community. So this came under the rubric of prevention grants that were available. We have Communities That Care began in 2005-07. It was a pilot project. It was funded by King County, and it was really to take a look at the underage drinking on the island. It was, our rates were higher than national norms and state norms at the time. Senior drinking rate past 30-day was about 54, where the state was 44. So we were really high, and the community was asking if we could do something about the underage drinking rate. So we had that pilot project. We brought people together, and from there we went into 2 grants that were drug-free communities for a period of 5 each, and that was, they were funded at $125,000 a year for 2 5-year periods, and that was specifically for youth substance abuse prevention. It was really to address that underage drinking rate. At the end of those 10 years, we did a think tank, and we brought together epidemiologists, psychologists, people who worked with eating disorders, substance abuse. They were all island parents. They were all island professionals. They were parent coaches, people to take a look at the data specific to Mercer Island youth, national data, data that was collected by the state, and then some of the data that we worked with youth in high achieving schools. And we asked them to take a look at, so we brought down the general drinking rate, but we didn't budge on the binge drinking rate. And that was a harder drinking rate for us to have an impact on. So that was from that grew the Healthy Youth Coalition. And in 2017, when that funding ended, we went for 2 years without any kind of funding. We did some projects that we could keep in-house. We worked with groups in the community to bring speakers here. So we worked at a reduced capacity and kept HYI going. And during that time, really continued to look for funding opportunities. And this is the good news. So this year we were able to apply for a couple of grants. The first one was a Sober Truth on preventing underage drinking. It's called a STOP grant. And this was specifically for preventing alcohol use among youth. We received the grant. It's for 5 years, 2019 to 2022 at $48,600. And this was open to people who had formerly had the drug-free community grant. So this is actually a grant that we've been waiting to see if it was going to be available. We thought perhaps, we didn't know if it would be kept in federal funding. And so it wasn't offered in 17, it wasn't offered in 18, and then it came available this March. So we applied for that. And we were delighted when we received that. And I have to admit, we were surprised. I mean, we're surprised when we get grants here because of our demographics, right? We know that. So we apply for any grant that we think that we would be a viable candidate, and we were awarded that. We also at the same time applied for the Partnership for Success. This is called a SPIF grant, and this is $300,000 annually for 5 years. And this looks at drug and alcohol prevention as well as mental health promotion. And that's because everything that we know and that the whole field of prevention knows is that if you want to have an impact on substance abuse, drinking, anything, you really have to up your mental health of your youth. And together, if you work with mental health and substance abuse, your long-term outcomes for youth are going to be a lot better. Prior to this, it was not available to cities like us to apply for. So this is the first year where it's been available to us. And we leveraged the work that we've been doing with Dr. Luther for youth in high achieving schools. And again, that's youth who are, this school district is in the 92nd to 98th percentile. Specifically looking at those youth because our outcomes are, we're now in one of those 4 youth categories according to the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. So it's youth growing up in poverty, youth growing up under discrimination, and then youth growing up in trauma, where perhaps there's a parent who's involved with the penal system, substance abuse, things like that. So our kids, for a variety of reasons, some of them don't do as well. And so we leverage this research, and we're very open about our community. We really began with that, in fact, and said, but our youth also need attention this way. So this was huge news to us and something that was very, very exciting. So we have 2 of these grants. I'm going to invite Derek Franklin up. Derek is, like I said, our senior programs manager. He's also our clinical supervisor, and he actually wrote the grant. And then we had an editor help us with it who works on the federal level. So he knows the grant inside and out, and he's presented and done a lot of work nationally and statewide. So he knows the grant well, and he knows the prevention model that we're working under. So I'm going to have him talk a bit about that and why we applied for this and what data we're following. And then we're both going to be available for questions.
Great, thank you, Cindy. Madam Mayor, Deputy Mayor, members of the council. I'm Derek Franklin, Programs Manager and Clinical Supervisor for Youth and Family Services Department. So Cindy sort of set us up a little bit for how we got the grants. I'll just give a few slides here on what the grants are and how they work. The grant model is one that's mandated by SAMHSA, the grant, the awarding body. It's called the Strategic Prevention Framework. The icon on the left of the screen sort of highlights how we run the grant. It's very science-based, on community and data-driven. We look at assessment, building capacity, action planning, strategic planning, implementation, and evaluation. The model goes circularly, so once community situations or data change, we would reassess and sort of start that process anew and modify our action plans accordingly. At the heart of the model is looking at sustainability for the grant and the coalition itself, as well as cultural competence, to roots to community-based work. The way it works is through, as Cindy was mentioning, it's community coalition-based, so it's through our current coalition model, the Healthy Youth Initiative. That's staffed by YFS. That also includes the volunteer members of the community that are leaders, experts in a particular field, stakeholders for youth health, and mental health promotion and substance abuse prevention. The SPIF, the Partnership for Success grant, also includes a component, no surprise based on its name, but in expanding our work to local partners. So we wrote into the grant, leveraging some of our existing work with some academics at UW to partner for the development of, for example, sort of novel online assessment screening tools for youth that would utilize existing data in the community. For example, social norms data that would allow youth to electronically take a confidential survey and get real-time feedback based on the data we would upload as to their level of substance use and how that compares to others. Prevention science has found that that in itself is a good prevention tool. It also has some screening components. Part of the grant also allows us to have funding for a universal level screening. One of the challenges for us has always been that even if we have capacity, we can't always ensure that kids and parents are going to step up and use it. So some of this grant moving forward allows us with models called SBIRT, the Strategic Brief Intervention and Referral to Treatment model, to screen kids in high school particularly, but also middle school, to see if we can catch those kids that might otherwise fall through the cracks. Part of the grant, with two grants, as Cindy mentioned, is the need to coordinate these. The STOP grant and SPIF grants are very complementary, but do different things. The STOP grant, if you can see on the left, really focuses specifically on underage alcohol prevention, where the SPIF grant not only focuses on alcohol prevention, but includes other drugs of abuse, as well as mental health promotion. Where the STOP Act, again on the left, we will see in the community, based on the funds, public health education, awareness, a continuation of Youth and Family Services social norms efforts, the Most of Us campaign that's somewhat mothballed over the past 2 years without funding to support its efforts. The SPIF grant will also have public health education awareness, social norms, but go beyond to some staff training and development. But again, the scope of that will include other substances of abuse beyond alcohol, as well as mental health promotion. On the left again, the STOP Act on the bottom there will be specific to supporting high school and middle school student awareness of alcohol, tobacco, and other, or alcohol issues, and prevention. It will support the High School Safe Club, which is a prevention club in the high school that's the youth that are involved in that club have volunteered with the Healthy Youth Initiative and brought some of the prevention messaging to the high school, both in terms of messaging sort of in the hallways, as well as even sign holding in the street about things like DUI or polysubstance use and driving under the influence. Moving on to grant funding and budget decisions. So some of the work that we needed to do was to decide how we would apply for these funds, given that our community is typically not a community that gets funded for these kinds of efforts based on our socioeconomics and other factors. But what we did was we used the SAMHSA model. We looked at other local examples of successful grants, and we budgeted to an extent that we thought what we applied for would be most competitive. These are highly competitive grants. There were 113 awarded throughout the country, just 4 in Washington State. And Mercer Island's the only non-tribal grant that was awarded in our state. It's so fairly competitive, and so some of those decisions were based on what we knew from looking at similar grants as well as our own history and other successful grants as to how to be most competitive in that process. The funding is scaled to meet the scope of our goals, especially with the Strategic Prevention Enhancement Grant. The things like the partnership with the University of Washington has significant funds allocated to it, and that's again based on the scope. Part of what we want to do, for example, with that partnership is to fund the Study for Health, or the partners at UW to, as I mentioned before, create a web-based tool that would allow for screening and direct prevention tools to be applied to kids, but that would be for the entire high school. That would include, for example, back-end monitoring confidentially of servers that would allow to collect this and work in partnership with the school to ensure that that data was handled appropriately, and all the details that would go into that. Next is the salary support for Youth and Family Services staff. That was determined for us by what the required efforts are on our end to implement new efforts associated with the grant. Both grants have language to say that there should not be supplanting of any funds, and that funds must supplement or enhance new prevention efforts. For us, there are a few areas we felt like we could ask for funds that would allow us to modify some of the jobs that were happening in-house, or, for example, give some funds to the school staff who are going to be asked to do something new in terms of prevention that's not part of their existing work. The idea of perhaps asking for more of those funds came somewhat optional, but came back to us as a decision about how to remain most competitive in the process. Looking at examples from other grants, going beyond that, we felt like would be detrimental to our odds in getting the grant award. Second to last here is so grant data and outcomes. First, in the substance abuse prevention, the kind of changes we can look forward to seeing in the community will be reducing current drug and alcohol use among youth, including alcohol, binge, as Cindy was mentioning, binge or heavy drinking, cannabis, marijuana use, opioid use, nicotine, e-cigs, and vape. We have, data is probably not surprising to folks that vaping, both nicotine and THC from cannabis has really become almost an epidemic, and we're not immune to that. We've seen other scary issues around the community with overdose deaths from fentanyl and opioid overdoses. We hope to keep that at bay and want to put efforts towards that. Other outcomes include increasing the perception of risk or harm. One of the variables towards youth involved in youth deciding to use substances is how risky or harmful they believe it is. That gets back to some public health messaging. And then finally, increase a perception of parent and peer disapproval. Similar sort of logic where if we can, on a population level, start to move that needle, as we had been doing under the Drug-Free Community Grant, towards parents, kids in general, beginning to reinforce themselves in terms of the use of alcohol, marijuana, other substances not being either normative or approved of. The icon on the right of your screen, I included to explain a little bit how prevention fits in the YFS strategy overall. This is a continuum of care model we borrowed from the Institute of Medicine that explains on your left in the dark blue, it talks about how a comprehensive set of strategies for a community change organization like ourselves includes part promotion, part prevention, part treatment, part recovery. So what that looks like for us is these grants funding health promotion and a good chunk of prevention, especially universal prevention. Another way to think of universal prevention would be population level prevention. How you can again move the needle for cohorts of kids and parents and families. Currently, Youth and Family Services is, and inappropriately in some way, heavy on the treatment side. Treatment would include mental health counseling, mental health support, In other words, working with folks who already have some sort of risk factor indicated in their presentation. What these grants do a nice job of is sort of backfilling what the Drug-Free Community Grant had done, which was give us better capacity on the prevention and promotion side. And this will ratchet us back up for the next 4 to 5 years to balance that treatment strategy. Moving on. The other area that we will see changes and outcomes in the mental health arena, reducing stigma around help-seeking behaviors, whether that's for help for kids or adults at risk for suicide, mood disorders like anxiety, depression, or bipolar disorder. We look to decrease rates of youth anxiety and depression specifically. Cindy mentioned some of the work with Dr. Luthar in our community specific to the risks affecting affluent youth. A recent Robert Wood Johnson study found that, and really is identified already, that affluent kids are an at-risk population, not for many things, but for a few things. And some of that is our anxiety and depression, oftentimes related to pressures to succeed. And then finally, increasing capacity to screen youth, as I said before, for mental health issues, which is part of the early intervention strategy that's so helpful. And then this last slide, wrapping up, and then we're happy to take questions. Again, under grant data and outcome category. So what benefits overall will these grants provide to the community? One is simply healthy youth. These evidence-based prevention strategies will result in fewer youth with alcohol and drug and mental health issues. Also a comprehensive strategy for a healthy community. I was mentioning how for youth and family services, we have better capacity on the intervention side. These grants will allow us to complement that with better capacity upriver on the prevention side as well. Prevention itself also saves money and heartache by reducing future treatment needs, hospitalizations, inpatient care. I've seen many different numbers for $1 of prevention being worth either $3 to $5 to up to $20 down the road in terms of what it costs communities in terms of treatment if we can't get ahead of some of these issues. And then finally, this will allow us to really develop a playbook for successful and integrated prevention and treatment model for affluent suburban communities like ourselves. The Partnership for Success grant includes a contract epidemiologist to help us better study our own outcomes, ensure that our efforts are generating the outcomes we're looking for, and then ultimately share what we're doing here with partners in the prevention field, including the University of Washington's Prevention Technology Transfer Center. There's a regional network of prevention academics, and part of this grant would be for us to share what we're doing here. Not many affluent communities were awarded this, I believe, so we hope to do it right and do it effectively here and share that up. And that's all I have, and I'll turn it back to the council for questions. Thank you very much.
And thank you. Council, does anyone have any questions? Wendy?
First of all, wow, thank you so much for that great job in getting 2 grants. They're going to have a huge impact. And I'm just curious how we're going to partner with the school district to do a lot of this work and how you see that, how that partnership going forward and working together.
I'll say a couple things, yeah. Well, we just let them know that we received the grant, so that was the first part. We let them know that we are interested in doing this, and both of us really have, we've both had our eyes open for funding that we can bring this into the school. So we are both committed to being partners, and what that will look like, we don't have the specifics. They know that we want to do some kind of screening, and we've spoken about the different elements, but the timeline for that exactly will work out together.
Okay, Benson, I saw you leaning in.
You know, I also, I'll echo the wow. I mean, I think this is actually a great thing for YFS and also for the city. Just before I ask my question, I just have to make a statement. I've been on this alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs committee that's part of this Healthy Youth Initiative, and I will tell you that for the past couple of years, it has definitely slowed down because of the lack of funding. But I think with this additional funding, I think the focus on preventing alcohol abuse by our young people and hopefully discouraging other use of drugs and vaping and what have you. I mean, I'm just really encouraged, and I'm excited about the prospects. But here's my question, okay? So, you know, as far as there's always a concern about, okay, now we have the grants, now we have the money. I know that in the agenda bill, it talked about the FTE or maybe 1.5, 1.7 FTEs. The grants fully fund the additional person, and that's a question, or I guess maybe looking for confirmation. Plus, in addition to salary and benefits, I mean, obviously that person has to be planted somewhere. So is that also a cost that's covered by the grant?
Yeah, all of the costs for the positions and any activity that we're doing are covered by the grant. So salaries, all benefits, anything to go with that position itself, any kind of computer needs, any kind of capital needs will be covered by the grant. In addition, all of the training for that staff and our project director and anybody who works with this project, I believe they're for a year, will be taken back to DC for regular training. So they really build that into it. So the $300,000 is for that. There is no matching.
Great, Celine.
So first, congratulations. This is mind-blowing, and I think the more you look at it, the more you realize this really does round out the services that YFS is offering. It is, in my mind, semi-restoration, semi-new. It's all good news. So again, wow, congratulations. I had asked some questions, and I received some documentation. Council got BCC'd on it, but I was asking for some of the funding documents. And as I was looking at the budget documents, I started to realize I think the budget was submitted as part of the grant application. Is that right? So that when I'm looking through these various budgets and I'm seeing this much personnel, this much program, this much, UW interface, that was what was put in the grant proposal as it was applied for, and then
Right.
We were granted the money based on that. Is
That's
that my
right.
understanding?
That's right. And then you're also given time as a funding agency to submit adjustments to that. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So I would urge the council to look at that email. You can just search for the agenda bill, the 5621. It was really good information, I think. It helped me really understand where we're going with this. But one thing that is unclear to me, because it's a blend of new and existing costs, is what is the YFS budget relief impact of the two grants over the 5 years? I saw personnel costs allocated to the grants of 610,000. I don't know if there's any new FTE in that or if that's applied to existing FTEs, but I'm wondering overall if you could just tell me how much budget relief over 5 years.
Yeah, but let me make sure I understand this. So for the grant will pay for the salaries needed to conduct all the activities of the grant. For some of the Youth and Family Services staff, we will have them do some of those positions, and we will hire for other people to do the lower end work of the grant. So for instance, Derek will be the project director. Tammy will be it for another grant. That will be a portion of their position, and we will hire for the work that they will now be unable to do. So we estimated when we first wrote it, and and I believe we just submitted an adjustment to that. But so the grant will not supplant any paid staffing except for the piece for the school counselors.
Okay, so
That
that's
makes
the
sense?
roughly
Yeah.
24,000 a year. Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. I have a question, and it's pretty basic, and that is, what can our families, what can our kids anticipate seeing, and what is the impact that they'll have? What kind of services or access or resources will they have that they haven't had?
Thank you, Mayor. So part of public health efforts are, the roots go back to awareness. And so I think all kids in the community are going to know and see, whether it's through simple posters on the wall in their schools, signs at Mercerdale Park, ads in the paper, spots on the radio, concerted media effort to get the baseline awareness about substance abuse, mental health, reducing stigma in people's consciousness. So part of it is that we hope that Mercer Island will become a more substance abuse aware, mental health aware community in general. Some of our efforts target also, so parents, through partnerships with Parent Edge, through town hall meetings, there's going to be opportunities for adults to learn more about specific skills, for kids to get more education in terms of what that means, not just for preventing substance use, but for those already at risk, for harm reduction strategies. Also, there will be kids in the school that are going to get new curriculum. There's funding in these grants for our elementary, middle, and high school kids staff to be able to go in and do new curriculum, enhanced social emotional work, doubling down on some of the existing social emotional efforts like Second Step and some of the other curriculum that are in school. So you're going to see in school and enhanced efforts and time available for some of these prevention tools. The community will see a broad swath of efforts. We hope also to come back to council and partner more frequently in terms of potential policy strategies that could support these types of efforts. The council here in this room made Mercer Island the first city in the state to have an enhanced underage drinking ordinance. Perhaps there's room to expand that. Those kinds of discussions are things we look forward to having more moving forward.
That's great. Thank you so much. I would look forward to hearing, whether I'm in the audience or up here, but I would look forward to hearing more about, I think as Councilmember Weicker mentioned, the partnership with the district, but also, how we're going to reach the adults, because I think that's also where a lot of the education need exists as well. First I see Benson, and then we'll go to Salim.
Can you discuss the reporting requirements that you folks will have to do? I mean, I assume you have to do a reporting requirement to the grant funders. So that's number one. And then I guess the follow-up question is, do you anticipate giving some sort of annual report to the community in terms of what's being done, the results of these efforts?
So there's the reporting will be quarterly to SAMHSA. They've got online reporting mechanisms, probably similar to our drug-free community grant, although multiplied by 2. And that will be done by Tamby Cork and myself, so staff for the grant. And Councilmember Wong, the second part of your question?
The second part was simply, do you anticipate reporting out to the community on a periodic basis as far as results or?
So yeah, thank you. Part of the work actually in the SPIF grant says that we hope to actually come before council at least on an annual basis to report on the progress of these grants. The town hall meetings that we have scheduled as well are opportunities for us to share out data. Most of the data we use, and the best data we use, are data from the school, the Healthy Youth Initiative, the Asset Survey, and we run other data tools ourselves, our own Youth and Family Services Social Norms Survey, and well as others. So our intent would be at the town hall meetings and other sort of public forums we have to be able to bring that back and watch the needle. Prevention is slow. I mean, prevention takes sometimes cohorts of kids to see the needle move, but we've had success here with the drug-free community grant, as Cindy mentioned, and to see some measurable effects, we hope to do the same.
All right, Salim.
I'm going to make a motion to authorize the city manager to accept the SAM HSA STOP and SPIF grants and appropriate $435,750 in grant funds for the 2019-2020 biennium.
Second.
First and second, any discussion? Bruce?
I too will echo the congratulations to you for this. I may be overly concerned here, but I just want to make sure you get credit where credit's due for your process for applying for grants over time and not have the possibility that anybody in the community might suggest that you're applying for this grant is only a reflection of some in the community telling you that you needed to apply for grants because you hadn't been doing that. Because there had been some talk some months ago about why were we failing to get grants. Could you just speak to your process for applying and whether that's driven by, what that's driven by?
Yeah. When we look at what we apply for, well, first of all, what we apply for is really taken by what we know the needs of our community to be. So we try to stay up on what do we need for seniors, what do we need for children, youth, and adults, and where are our services, and then where do we have room for growth. We monitor what comes out to us from the state, federal registries, and then local granting opportunities. So Best Starts for Kids. In our community, there's Mercer Island Community Fund, there's Rotary, there's other small, and then we have certain family foundations, private foundations that invite us to apply. So over the years, we've watched those a lot. Some we know, some we don't. I know that it's hard to say, but some we know that we won't be considered for. Sometimes we have pre-conversations with them to clarify what their intent is. Sometimes we take a risk and apply anyway, but we historically have looked at all of those areas of funding that become available, vet them, and then apply for those that are appropriate. So for instance, this year where are we? We're November. We've vetted about 23 already, and we keep track of them so that we can know what we've vetted them for, what area they were. Were they prevention? Were they treatment? Would they have supplanted funds or would they not have supplanted? And if we applied for them, we apply for them, we either get turned down or not. And if we don't, we write down why, what went into that decision. So we've done this for many years now, so that's what brings it in. And we were fortunate to get this. I mean, I really want to tell you, we applied for 3 grants this year that were outside shots, but we did it anyway, and we were blown away. I mean, so anyway.
Cindy,
So
could you?
it'd be safe to say that this is a standard practice for you to review.
Oh, yeah.
Watching for lots of
Oh,
things.
clearly, yeah.
Doing the pre-work and then
Yeah.
applying for the ones where you think you've got a shot.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to clarify as well. Can you remind us, were we eligible to apply for these grants previously?
No. So, one of them wasn't available to cities to apply for. So the STOP grant was not, the SPIF grant was for other entities. It went to the state. This was the first year that we could apply for. The other monies were new and in the budget, but we were concerned that they were cut out. So that we've been watching for, we've been hoping for. The TIA, the first one that we got for the trauma-informed care, we were the last community mentioned for being eligible. So again, it's trying to write a great grant, a great proposal, and hoping that things align and that they have enough funds to spread around. And it worked. And we got well rated and we got these grants. But it's common practice and it's always been this way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I think, just a huge thank you to those of you who are here in the room, but I'm sure it was a team effort that extends well beyond YFS, probably into that school district and everything else.
Yeah.
So super kudos. Council, we have a motion on the table. Any further discussion? All right, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, motion passes. Great, well done. We're on such a good news kind of roll tonight. All right, next on our agenda is the regular business agenda bill 5621, sales and use tax for affordable and supportive housing. For that, we welcome Deputy Community Planning and Development Director Allison Van Gorp. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Just give me a moment to get my presentation up.
Sure.
All right. Thank you, Mayor and Council. I have a pretty brief presentation. We've talked about this HB 1406 a couple of times now, and I just want to walk you through what's before us tonight, and then we can go through any questions. Okay, so I'm going to give you a quick overview of the legislation that was passed, what the eligible expenditures, and the ordinance that's before us tonight, and next steps. So this legislation was passed earlier this year. It authorizes counties and cities to implement a local sales tax to fund affordable or supportive housing, but it's actually credited back from the state's portion of the sales tax. So the cost to the consumer, the tax to the consumer is not increased. It's really just a credit from states' funds to the cities and counties. If the city opts out of collecting this tax, our share would go to King County. It's a 20-year program, and it's targeted to serve households that are at or below 60% of the city's median income. Eligible expenditures under the grant are for acquiring, rehabilitating, or constructing affordable housing, as well as operations and maintenance of new affordable or supportive housing. And for cities under 100,000 people, we can also use it for rental assistance to tenants. We're estimating that Mercer Island would receive approximately $36,000 per year from this tax credit. And staff have identified 3 potential options for how we could use this revenue. I just wanted to note, we don't need to make a decision on this tonight. We'll plan to come back early next year with a budget amendment. I just wanted to give you an overview of the thoughts to date on how the funding could be used. So the Arch Housing Trust Fund would be one avenue. We could funnel funding into the construction or preservation of affordable units in East King County. We could give funding to Youth and Family Services for their emergency assistance program. This is an existing program that we have that provides emergency rental assistance as well as utility assistance to families in need. It's kind of a small amount. Usually it's limited to $1,000 per year for one-time or ongoing support for families in need. And the final option would be to use the money to directly construct housing here in Mercer Island. We could either accumulate our $36,000 per year until we have enough to build units, or we could bond against that revenue as well.
I think we have a quick question.
Go for it.
Do you know what the funding source is for the YFS Emergency Assistance Program? Is it the general fund?
I
Or is
believe
it?
so. I'm not positive about that.
Hi, Lamont Tuttle, your interim finance director. The current existing emergency assistance program with Youth and Family Services is funded 100% by donations. There's no general fund money to that. They can only spend as much as they bring in.
Great.
All right, so to enact the tax, you have an ordinance before you, number 19C16. It would add a small new section to city code, just providing for this tax to be collected and identifying the eligible expenditures that it can be applied to. If we adopt it this month in November, there is kind of a 30-day waiting period while the state provides public notice, and then the tax could begin to be collected in January. And the city would start to see those revenues in March.
Benson?
Allison, just a follow-up question as far as how frequent would the city receive those remittances?
I believe it's quarterly.
Is it quarterly? Okay.
It would be similar to other sales tax revenue we collect. Mhm.
All right. Is this the end of the presentation, or do we have more? Okay.
Just the recommended actions tonight are to suspend the council rules of procedure and allow this to be adopted without a second reading, adopt the ordinance, and then staff will be planning to come back, as I mentioned, in a couple months to talk about how the revenue could be used.
Great. Okay. Council, any questions?
We have-
Benson?
So a couple, I think these things are tied, but I'm looking at, for instance, do you have the ordinance in front of you there? I'm sorry, this is on 4.15.020, letter C. So this is on page 8 of Exhibit 2. I was just curious as far as the language of this recital, where it talks about the city must consider the income of individuals and families, and the housing needs within the city. So the reason why I asked the question is that you listed options, whether it's Arch, the tenant assistance, or something else. So the way this reads, am I reading this wrong, or is this mandating us to say that it has to be, we have to use the money for the assistance for tenants?
No, this is just saying generally we need to consider the income of the individuals and families, more specifically that we're meeting that 60% of the city's median income level, and that we should consider how the resources are leveraged. So are there other funding sources that are assisting with that particular project or effort? And then we should also consider the housing needs within our city.
Okay, so I mean, so the city council, I'm not thinking that this is probably going to happen, but the city council could in fact dedicate the entire amount towards Arch, and that's not going to be in violation or, with the terms of the ordinance.
Correct.
Okay?
And if I could just add to that, that language is in the House bill that was passed into law. And if you consider that the House bill itself allows the pooling of the cities in funding a regional project, I think that answers your questions.
Okay. I realize that we don't have to make a decision on the use, so, thank you.
So follow-up question to that. You provided 3 basic options, which were Arch, our own efforts, and/or the rental assistance. Can we choose a combination of those 3?
Yes, you could.
Okay.
And we could have a different combination with each of our biennial budgets if we wanted to.
Okay, and then another one is just simply on the sequencing. So if assuming we pass an ordinance tonight, we start collecting, but yet we wouldn't be able to distribute or allocate those funds until that next ordinance is passed, determining how to spend the money.
Correct. We need to
Okay.
amend the budget to indicate how it's going to be used.
So we're okay to go through step 1 without having gone through step 2?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Council, any further questions? Seeing none, I'd welcome a motion.
Move to suspend city council rules of procedure requiring second reading.
Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, passes.
Move to adopt ordinance number 19C-16, enacting a sales and use tax for affordable and supportive housing and amending section 4.15 MICC.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Great, thank you. Super. So next item of regular business is Agenda Bill 5620, which is an update to the Business and Occupation Tax Municipal Code language. And for that, we welcome Special Projects Consultant Matt Mornick. Welcome. I think this is your first presentation to council.
Indeed. Yeah. Good evening, council, mayor, and city manager Bond. My name is Matt Mornick, a new part-time member to the city manager's team. I'm going to take about 10 minutes of your time this evening to walk through 12 slides that explain the mandatory updates to Mercer Island City Code that result from state efforts to simplify the administration of business and occupation tax. If it pleases council, I'd be happy to take questions at the end. As you are aware, a business and occupation tax is a tax that is levied as a percentage of gross revenues. So the maximum tax that a city can charge is 0.2% unless voter approved. And in 2004, cities with a business and occupation tax were encouraged, if not required, by the state to adopt a model ordinance, which is essentially similar language across all cities so that we could avoid double taxation while simultaneously make it easier for businesses to pay the tax. This language was updated in 2008 and again in 2012. And our focus this evening is about the most recent and third update in 2019. 46 cities have implemented a business and occupation tax. All of these cities are in Western Washington. And the most recent city to do this was Shoreline, who put forward a business and occupation tax in 2019, January 2019. Updates to the Mercer Island City Code, Chapter 410, are due to activity at the state government. In 2017, the state put in motion efforts to improve the business climate with the passage of HB 2005. But before we get to what's going on at the state, Mercer Island charges a 0.10% B&O tax on gross revenues. Taxpayers who earn more than $150,000 in annual income pay this tax annually, and they file it at the end of the calendar year, 30 days after the end of the calendar year. Okay. So as I was saying, with the passage of House Bill 2005 in 2017, a task force was created to evaluate the how cities apportion B&O tax. This task force included one member from the Department of Revenue, 3 folks from cities with B&O taxes, and 3 business representatives. They met monthly between August 2017 and September 2018. And in 2018, they submitted unanimous recommendations on how to update the apportionment rules within the Business and Occupation Model Ordinance language. That led to the passage of HB 1403 and HB 1059 in 2019. Passage of HB 1403 updates definitions that pertain to how businesses divvy up B&O tax payments when business activity takes place in multiple jurisdictions. Also, it provides for an alternative to portioning out B&O tax payments if a local business decides that the new apportionment laws don't really pertain to how they conduct their business. It's important to distinguish between allocation and apportionment. Businesses allocate tax payments when they conduct business activity in solely one city or one taxing jurisdiction. And the 2019 updates in no way affect this aspect of the law. Businesses apportion or proportionally divvy up their B&O tax payments when their business activity spans multiple jurisdictions. And this apportioning method has changed due to the law, updates in 2019. So customer location was previously defined where the majority of physical contacts took place between the business and its customer. But that was determined by the task force to be a really cumbersome definition to navigate because typical business transaction documentation doesn't really clarify where the majority of physical contacts actually takes place. So based on their research with what takes place in other states, they amended the definition of customer location to be within the city. And that new definition establishes an apportionment test, which you can see on the slide, based on whether or not the customer is a resident or a business. And so now businesses can more easily navigate this, the process of apportioning income, B&O tax payments, based on this hierarchy. The Chapter 410 update also provides an alternative if the new apportionment provisions do not fairly represent the extent of a taxpayer's business activity. So a taxpayer or a business can petition if they feel that this new apportionment doesn't work well for them, and the city's tax administrator, the finance department, can ask for more information and come to a reasonable adjustment or a reasonable alternative. The second law that passed is HB 1059, which changes the filing deadlines for B&O tax annual filers to April 15th. This aligns with federal tax return filing deadlines and essentially makes it easier on local businesses. This law is delayed until 2021 for when 2020 taxes will be filed. Before HB 1059, annual returns, like I said, were due 30 days after the end of the calendar year. And so finance will evaluate how holding year-end revenue accruals open will impact our financial statements. And we will also put processes in place and notify taxpayers of the updated ordinance. There are a total of 4,000 businesses that have a business license to do business in Mercer Island, and of that, 750 paid roughly a total of $679,000 worth of business and occupation tax in 2018. So staff will closely monitor B&O tax revenues when these laws go into effect. And these changes to Chapter 410 are required to go into effect before January 1st, 2020. And so our recommendation this evening is to set Ordinance 19C18 for second reading and adoption, or suspend Section 6.3 of your Rules of Procedure and adopt Ordinance 19C18 this evening. Are there any questions?
Council, any questions? That was a pretty thorough presentation. Thank you for that. Benson?
I don't have a question necessarily about the ordinance, but more of a general question about B&O tax. And I don't know if you'd be the right person to, Matthew, if you're the right person, or whether or not this is something for the interim city attorney. But the question I have is on exemptions on B&O tax. You mentioned one was if your gross revenue is under $150,000. A question I have is whether or not there's other ways, for instance, for new businesses, regardless of how much gross revenues they make, is the city empowered to exempt those new businesses from B&O tax? And so I don't know what the answer is. I'm just raising the question.
I don't have an exact answer to that right now. If you'd like, I can take a look. However, I believe the city, that would be outside the scope of the city's authority for that type of exemption because of the uniformity requirement in taxes. So if a like business, if two coffee shops open, one that was, does business in Mercer Island and one that is, recently opened versus one that's been in business for 10 years, you have to tax them the same way. And just for the factor that they've opened the store more recently, I do not believe that's a legal basis for an exemption. However, this is, it's not a firm answer that I'm giving you. It's what I believe the law to be at this point, and I can take a look at that and get back to the city.
I was approached by somebody who raised that as a possibility in terms of trying to help local businesses in the town center, new businesses. And so that was just one idea that the person shared with me. So I'm just raising it here. And, I realize time is, you only have so much time. And so I don't know what the answer is or how quickly you can find that answer. So, or whether or not the city manager would even allow you to take a look. So, okay, all right. So anyway, I just had to at least raise it. So thank you.
We're going to punish you by making you make the motion.
There you go.
Okay.
All right,
Okay.
Bruce.
Thanks for the presentation. It helped me to understand this. The model ordinance concept, the only thing I'm chasing here is whether we adopt this tonight or whether we take it in 2 bites. And the way I wanted to get at that is to understand whether this model ordinance language, do we have any flexibility to do something different if between now and the next reading, a citizen came to us and said, gee, I'd really think you ought to do something different with that language? Or is this really completely baked by the state and the model ordinance language such that we're not making modifications to it, even if there is input like that?
Yeah, I think the point of the model ordinance is that everyone that does have B&O taxes, that they have the same language so that if you are a business and you do business in multiple cities, you're following the same rules. We did do the bare minimum on this. We did not go above and beyond adding anything else that was not in the model ordinance that is mandatory. So when you look at the model ordinance, there's pieces that you don't have to have. There are pieces we have that are not in there from a long time ago when it was first enacted. But with this update, we went through and just took and just made the changes that we needed to. I don't believe that there's anything that we can really change between first and second reading because we did do, we have to do what the state says when it comes to that.
Thank you. be happy to make a motion if we're ready.
I think we'd all welcome one.
All right, so I would
Benson, you can second it.
I would move to suspend the City Council Rules of Procedure, Section 6.3, requiring a second reading of an ordinance.
I didn't know that's where you were going, Bruce. Yes, okay, I second that.
Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay.
I would move to adopt ordinance number 19C-18, amending Chapter 4.10 of the Mercer Island City Code relating to business and occupation tax.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, motion passes. Great, thank you for your first presentation. That was great. Great job done.
Thank you.
Okay, so we now move to the final item of regular business, which is Agenda Bill 5624, the 2020 Comprehensive Plan Amendment Docket. For that, we welcome Community Planning and Development Director Evan Maxim, but I know the Deputy Mayor has a
Yeah.
quick interjection.
If I might jump in. So I was absent at the last council meeting, but I was at the planning meeting for this meeting. And it slipped past me that this AB 5624 has gotten out of sequence with another AB that was on the agenda at the last meeting. So in order to rectify that, I'm going to make a motion just to table this agenda bill till after we have before us at the next council meeting the 2019 comp plan amendments. So I move to table discussion on the 2020 comprehensive plan docket until the meeting on December 3rd to allow the city council to complete their deliberations on the 2019 comprehensive plan amendments.
Second.
First and second, council, any questions? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, it is tabled. Super, great. So with that, we now move on to other business and the planning schedule. So the first point, council, I'd like to make is that we do currently still have a scheduled meeting for December 17th. And after talking to staff, we'd like to propose that if we need a second meeting in December, that we consider a special meeting December 10th and canceling the December 17th. So that would give us a meeting on the 3rd and the 10th, and then allow staff and council and the public to take a break. So I think I'll just plant that for now, and maybe, Jesse, you want to go ahead and talk through the rest of the planning calendar?
Sure. I'm sorry. Sure. We will do we'll reach out to the council members regarding your availability on December 10th. I think it's safe to say that December 17th is getting pretty close to the holiday, and people are ready to time out there. No real updates. We have a very full agenda on November 19th, and the agenda on December 3rd is also getting relatively full. The one thing I wanted to point out is we are looking ahead to 2020. We have the schedule laid out, not in your packet all the way through the end of the year, but the staff planning schedule. We were looking at the full year ahead. A reminder, we have planned the planning session for next year's council for the weekend of January 25th. And I think I will leave it at, oh, Ally's writing me a note. A reminder, we do have an agenda, a planning schedule change. November 19th, we will be bringing back, this is not on your schedule right now, the Code of Ethics. You may recall that you recently adopted a Code of Ethics, and we are working on the procedural component of that code. We have the policy, but not the procedures. So Ally and team are working on getting that ready for the 19th, and we will be bringing that back for your consideration.
Okay, so are there any decisions that need to be made tonight, or just we're going to check with council members to see if the 10th would be an option, if needed?
You could all give us a thumbs up if you know you're available on the 10th. That would save us a step. Hey.
Well, that was efficient.
Nicely done. Thank you.
Super. Okay, so we will have a meeting December 10th unless it's deemed unnecessary at this point.
Correct.
And the 17th has been, do we need a motion to actually cancel the December 17th?
Yes.
We do. Okay, does somebody want to make a motion to cancel the December 17th meeting?
Second.
All right, so first and second, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, it's been canceled. Super. So with that, are there any upcoming council member absences to report? Dave? Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Okay, so council member reports. We're going to start with Dave. Bruce? Celine? Benson?
Just a few things. Excuse me. I just want to, special thanks to the organizations that hosted a number of candidate forums. I attended a number of them, but special thanks to the League of Women Voters, the Chamber, the Rotary, Island Books, and the Beach Club. Bruce is being somewhat modest, but some of us attended. Some of us attended on the 23rd of October, K4C Summit that was held. Oh, now he remembers. That was held at the Mercer Island Event Center. It was for elected officials, and at the end of the meeting, our council member Bruce Bassett was toasted by King County. Not roasted, but toasted by King County Executive Dow Constantine for his years of service and addressing climate change and sustainability issues. So kudos for him for that. Okay.
Congratulations.
Okay. Well, I'll be quick. On Monday, October 28, I was dialing for dollars for the Mercer Island Schools Phone-a-thon. And it's not too late to give. They raised over $30,000 in those 2 days, and they have a target of about a little bit under $500,000. So there's, they're actually pretty far along because of people have given in advance. But again, it's not too late to give to the foundation as part of your charitable giving. And then lastly, the chamber sent out a notice to some of us regarding a special exhibit that was held at Clark & Clark in the town center. And so there was a special exhibit by a artist who lives in Bellevue, Agnes Lee. But there, I also met Alex Fan, who's the director of the Taipei Economic and Cultural Office in Seattle. And so it was a good meeting. He took the time to come to Mercer Island to actually go to the exhibit. So it was a good chance to enjoy some art and some ginger beer that they were serving. So.
Wendy?
I'll just say regarding the chamber, they had a really fun fitness crawl on Saturday. 6 clubs participated. I think they had about 40 or 50 people register, and they ran us around in teams of 3. I hit 4 gyms, and I'm still sore. They make you do squats and burpees and all kinds of crazy stuff. But we have some great resources downtown, and Sano Cafe made some awesome treats, and Mio Posto had a great celebration after. And then shout out to the band boosters and Mercer Island Schools music program for an awesome auction on Saturday night. I think they raised a lot more money than they expected to, and it was a lot of fun and a sold-out event. And then finally, looking forward, put March 22nd on your calendars for next year and come run a 5K, a 10K, or a half, or walk it or skip it. Meaning skipping, don't not show up, but that's the Rotary MI half.
Okay. I think the only thing that I would remind the community is December 6th, we have a tree lighting, followed by a firehouse munch. Again, thanks to very generous community, well, multiple generous community members. So put that on your calendars as well. With that, I think we need to excuse Councilmember Andrew. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. All right. Best and final, City Council will now recess into executive session for approximately 90 minutes to discuss pending or potential litigation with legal counsel pursuant to RCW 4230-1101I, and for planning or adopting the strategy or position to be taken by the City Council during the course of any collective bargaining, professional negotiations, or grievance or mediation proceedings, or reviewing the proposals made in the negotiations or proceedings while in progress pursuant to RCW 4230-1404B. No action will be taken. So it is 8:23.